Meets World.
What up, bros?
What up, bros?
And welcome to Bro Meets World.
Well, it's Bro Meets World / Pod Reacts.
That's right. This is your Bro Meets World Pod React. I'm Siege.
And I am Tonathy Quartus.
Quartus. We are back again. Great to see you guys. It's been a while, so we're back. I don't know.
We're back.
We're
back.
We're doing it. We're still doing it. For all of you who have been listening and continue to listen, we want to shout you out. We appreciate you. Right off the back, I will say we've had some news in the Boy Meets World atmosphere in the universe. So just
class
something
discussion alert.
Yeah, a little class discussion, a little morning announcements. One being Trina McGee announced that she, unfortunately, not too long ago announced that she was pregnant, and then she also announced that she had lost the child. So we just want to give condolences to her and her family. We know that it's not easy, and yeah.
Absolutely. And also just to go through something like that publicly is never easy either. So it's just it's a lot.
Absolutely, like really feel for her. And then other things that you guys have been reaching out to us about. Ben is back out doing the con circuit.
Ben Savage?
Yeah, Ben Savage. He's back out there.
Ben Savage of Little Monsters?
Yeah, of Little Monsters fame. I think that's what he goes. You may know me from such things as Little Monsters.
Yeah. It's interesting, but I'm not surprised because it seems, and I'm not saying this to be shady, I'm not at all, but it feels like he had a very unsuccessful run at political offices and has decided that maybe that's not the fit for him that he wanted it to be. So I'm not surprised to see him back in the circuit.
At least not at this time, I would say. You never want to count anyone out, but if you are able to see him and you want to say hi or want whatever, I would suggest stop asking this dude about the podcast. He's aware of it. He knows. He's made his choices. Don't ask this man whether or not he'll be on the podcast.
You know what? Here's something I will say to our patrons. If you find Ben Savage at your local convention, I'm going to give you some tips as someone who met Ben Savage. First of all, I've gone on record saying this. He was very lovely to me. I can't speak on his experiences with anyone else, but he was a very nice man to me. And he was truly moved to hear what it was about the show that meant a lot to me. He was like, wow. And I think the fact that like we were black kids kind of threw him off a little bit, but he was like extremely interested to just like hear how the show affected us. And, it seems like he got a lot of joy out of that. So I don't think he has any like disdain for the show or anything. It just seemed like he was trying to do something else for a while. But if you do approach him, if you see him, maybe just tell him what you like about the show, because I think it'll mean a lot to him.
Yeah, tell him what you like about the show. I just like, there are lots of people, and I'm looking at like the whole Chappell Roan conversation of like celebrity is really hot right now. And I will say there is a lot of individuals who I feel don't really understand that celebrities are still people, and that like if you had a friend who you wanted to do something, they said no, like no means no, let it be. Like,
honestly, I mean, this is kind of a separate conversation. I'm so team Chappell on this, and I'm so on board with this new generation setting boundaries for their work and personal life. I think not talking about boundaries and not speaking out loud when you're suddenly thrusted into fame has actually done more harm to Hollywood and the music industry, as we're seeing with 2024. Like this is progress, and I'm here for it.
Absolutely. So yeah, those are just some of the things that had been going on. And then you know what, we'll talk about the other thing when we get into the episode. But
okay,
you guys, this is your Pod Meets World Reacts. We are covering A Very Topanga Christmas and Raging Corey. I'm really excited to talk about these episodes. What do you have? What do you want to say about them?
Honestly, I'm excited to get to this. Like, I think I mentioned it a week or two so ago that like this period before we get to Lauren is actually filled with some very interesting episodes, some better than others, as we heard with these. But it was really great to get their thoughts on some of the stuff that we had been talking about, such as like the Topanga Christmas and her traditions, the kind of like you know, I don't want to say women hating attitude vibe that we got, but that we had a lot of beef with that aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I was interesting to hear their thoughts on that. And also from a production standpoint, understanding how they did like the skydiving scene and Raging Corey and things like that. Like all of that stuff is really interesting. So I thought I really enjoyed listening to both of these episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. To get right in, I will say one of the things that these two episodes particularly, because I went back and I listened to our reactions to them, and I was like, I'm actually enjoying doing this Pod Meets World react because, like, in order to like listen to everything and know, I'm able to see A, how we've grown, but B, I'm like, oh, I agree with my position, but like they were able to find like the joy in it. Like they were able to find like a little bit more positivity in it. And I'm like, I really do applaud them for that.
I think that they're a lot kinder towards issues that we kind of picked at as talking points. Not to say that we don't stand with those positions, but from your perspective of like they're finding more joy in it. And I think that as I'm like going back through this journey with them and I'm kind of casually watching season 5 episodes when I'm folding laundry or whatever now, like I am finding more joy in it now that I'm not as like caught up in it. And maybe I should have adapted Will's it's only from a male perspective, the boy and Boy Meets World from the beginning. It's really hard for me to just ignore that for 7 seasons, but he seems to be having a good time doing that. So maybe I should have tried that shit.
You know, it's so funny because like the reason why I'm saying this is because I was like, first of all of Ryder's objections, I was like for specifically, we're talking about A Very Topanga Christmas.
Yeah.
The very first episode, all of his objections when they start off the show, I was like, yep, absolutely agree. Like I'm on board with everything he's saying. And then Will's like, it is Boy Meets World. Yep. They want a male's perspective. They're going to do male tropes. And I'm like, I still feel, as I've always said, that that's not enough. We are specifically, you and I took the approach of what did we learn from this show and what did we feel would be outdated from this show. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, to that point, it was very telling that it took this episode for Ryder to have to explain to Danielle and Will what the Bechdel test even was. And that's information that we had going into our podcast, which I think maybe shaped the way we critiqued it a little bit more, because we were sensing this, inequality between the genders in terms of storyline and screen time and all these things from the get. And I think, then him planting that seed now, I wonder if the Bechdel test will come up again in future episodes or not. But it was telling to me that Ryder knew exactly what it was and was able to explain it.
Absolutely. And of course, if anyone would, it'd be Ryder.
Yeah.
But then also like, hearing Danielle being like, oh, I can relate to, having traditions and wanting to keep those traditions and someone else is coming in. And again, I was like, oh, they're actually being a lot more forgiving. And don't get me wrong, I feel like sometimes they're going to be too forgiving on a topic for my taste. But I don't know. I just wanted to say that.
Well, you know what? Here's something I will say. I think that they're a lot kinder towards the Jack and Sean storylines that we've been getting the last few episodes. And I still stand by what we were saying before, that like it feels tired. Like in this episode, they're talking about their differences in terms of how they celebrate Christmas. And the next episode, it's their differences of how they sleep at night. And it's like, I'm tired of it. And so I still stand by that, even though I'm able to appreciate some of the humor that they pointed out from Matt Lawrence's character in these 2 episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the differences, something that they also hit on, which I think you and I've always hit on, but I really wanted to call out, was this idea of like, why wouldn't Topanga's Christmas traditions be more of like old school Topanga? And like this difference between, we've already crossed the mark into Topanga being someone completely different.
Yeah, I love that they called it out. I also love that they called out that Topanga's parents aren't the type to go on a tropical vacation for Christmas. Like they would be volunteering or they would be given like at a shelter or something. So they're already pointing out the differences in, what's Corey says his nickname later, Captain Take Me Shopping or something. Like those differences in Topanga's character where they're skirting so far away from where she was in season one. But to their point, I think the humor and the conflict would have worked better if the differences were more extreme. If Topanga was like, oh, it is pagan to have a tree in the house or something, like where we put our trees outside, we do this, like something that was more over the top to have this confrontation actually mean something. Because I agree with them. Like, they were like, oh, she likes cider in a normal tree. And they were also smart enough to point out that the Matthews have always had a normal tree leading up to this episode. So lots of great observations.
Absolutely. I just really love the idea of like the Yule log. I thought that was great. And
Yeah.
then also I really liked Will's suggestion of like getting to the A Christmas Carol of it all earlier.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
like that idea of like, why are you not gonna show like the past, old Corey?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I love that. I also love what Danielle said about there should have been more of a mirroring between the Hunters and the Matthews in terms of like when you have Sean and Jack debating their Christmas differences, why not have like a trailer park Christmas, like that kind of vibe play more into it, go more extreme and bold with their class differences so we can actually see a resolution that we're like comforted by. Because even with them, just like with Corey and Topanga, because the conflict felt kind of weak, the resolution didn't really mean as much. So
well, yeah, like think of like the example of Danielle was like, oh, them being Chet's. So like, what is Christmas with Chet? Even if Chet doesn't have money, Chet's going to make sure that Christmas feels like is an experience, you know? And I feel like that would have been really great. Like they were talking about, oh, like you don't do this, or you don't like, I don't know, let's make something like you don't play like Dress the Raccoon, or you know, like all these things where it's like
oh, here it is. I got it. Here's the rewrite for the B episode. In an attempt to bond with Sean, Jack takes Sean to like a ski cabin, wherever, some kind of away trip. Power goes out, they're locked inside, and now they're stuck having like this makeshift Christmas. Sean starts making decorations out of like newspaper and things like that. And he's like, what a great idea. He's like, well, that's all we had at the trailer park. Like things like that.
Yeah,
would have
like
been helped
actually like praising the creativity that you have to have when you don't have as many things. I think
having
that's kind of like
Jack appreciate the simpler things versus that whole like, well, I like skiing in France. It feels like he should have learned the lesson along with Corey and Topanga.
Absolutely. And then sorry. I wanted to say to all of this, they had like a few discussions that I wanted to ask you about because I was very curious. One, I don't know if we had this discussion, but are like Christmas Eve day, like how did you feel about that conversation?
I agreed with them that Christmas Eve day only comes into question when you're scheduling for multiple families and you have to like block out time. But in terms of like, hey, Merry Christmas Eve. Like, never in my life have I said Merry Christmas Eve day. So I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, or tomorrow's Christmas Eve day. Like, you wouldn't say that. It's weird. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, again, I mean this with all the love in my heart. It feels like Michael Jacobs probably needed to be schooled on Christmas a little bit. Because clearly Ben did. He didn't even know the Christmas carol that he was supposed to sing. So there could have been some education there.
I actually thought that was really great when they gave us like that behind the scene talk about like Ben's anxiety.
Yeah.
All the things that like I also when they were like, it was just such a small part. I was like, to me, that says that Ben was like so freaked out about singing like the full song that they probably did just make it like a snippet.
I'm sure there's probably not a lot of memories of Ben being nervous or shy because he's been such like the lead of the show for so many years. So I'm sure that sticks out. Hey, here's another question that they raise. What's your experience with promise rings, if any?
I'm familiar with them. Never had one. Never I never did the promise ring things. I know they were really big with the Jonas Brothers. I remember that's when they came really back.
Really big with the Jonas Brothers. Also, as you know, I did escape a cult, and within my cult, promise rings were very much a thing that was encouraged for the teenage youth group. So, that was some trauma I'm shaking off still.
Shake it off. In the words of Tay Tay. Let me see. There was one more thing. The pajamas things. Like knowing that like getting like a pajamas as like the first gift. I just thought that was really good.
Let me see. Is there anything else here that I wanted to say? I said that they almost like they kind of bring up the communication issues between Topanga and Corey, not nearly as much as we did in terms of like, hey, what are your Christmas traditions before you come over? What kind of things do you like to do ahead of time? Topanga not bringing cider with her. Like these
I
are
love that
things,
they brought that up.
yeah, like they kind of touched on that. I think that was a bigger point of conflict for us with this episode. But other than that, I think we talked about everything I have for this one.
And the last thing I was just gonna say is like, as usual, both in this episode and the next one when we get into it, Bill Daniels' performance. I agree. Like for me, I was like, oh, what would it have been like if we just got the cast doing a recreation of A Christmas
Can I
Carol?
tell you that I would like that 10 times more than any time travel episode they ever did?
Yes. Like just Bill Daniels reading the story, kind of like an overhead narrator,
Hmm.
still doing like the meta commentary that we would always get, but it's actually just like them doing a Christmas Carol. And
Yeah,
every character gets to play like kind of like what Topanga pitched, but like as an episode.
sure. I would have loved that. Love that.
Okay, so all of that was just kind of like lead up to the better episode of these two, which would be Raging Corey. This is 512. I love that they love this episode. I love that they
Hmm.
called it one of their favorite episodes of season 5 so far
Ryder
because
said it was one of his top 5 episodes of the series. I know that.
yeah, and I can't deny this is a really good episode. It was so iconic, so memorable. And this is one of the ones where I was like, when I listened to our critiques on it, I didn't give the mirroring of the brothers' storyline the weight that I felt maybe now I would.
Sure. The thing that I realized with this episode was that I always kind of felt like I had a secret love for this episode. Like it was just one of those episodes that like I really liked. I think you really liked it too, but it wasn't like an extraordinarily popular episode. But to hear, the praise that they gave it, calling it one of their favorites, it really made me rethink and appreciate this episode. And this is what I mean in terms of like the interesting things that happen in season 5 before Lauren pops up, because we get this and the Inuit quote
Yeah,
unquote
what we're gonna call
episode.
it. Yeah.
And I think both of those episodes are some of the two best episodes of the entire series that we get right before we get into the Lauren storyline. So, I accredited a lot of season 5 successes to that breakup arc. However, it was clear to see now that the writers were already getting into their groove a few episodes leading up to it. And I think Raging Core is a great example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the things I wanted to say is they talked about how we kind of do something for everyone and
Yeah.
we get the family again, which we had the family in the last episode, but this one kind of like moves the story along in a better way, in my opinion. And also having, had the discussions of the bear and hacks and like all of these like what is comedy
Yes.
conversations. What I'm realizing is a lot of comedy, or a lot of awarding comedy, is the ability to have several storylines with several different characters and make them all tie in a really
Yeah.
meaningful way. And I would have to admit that this episode does that.
I have to agree with you that I think that just in a side tangent about the bear and its qualifications as comedy has a lot more to do with people falling in love with their characters. And I think
Yeah.
that Boy Meets World and the love and affection that it gets has a lot to do with people falling in love with their characters. And I think that Raging Corey is such a great episode to highlight specifically like the father-son dynamic that we saw a lot of in season 1. I feel like if you were a big fan of season 1, then this is a great episode to circle back to, probably why they liked it so much. Not only the family dynamic, kind of talking about it from the kid's perspective, the thing that I thought was so interesting was as adults, they're watching this and they're like, you know what? Writers like I've been that point with my kid where I'm just tired and I have to be like I don't have any more gas left in me. And to hear him side with Alan's character in an episode that we've always critiqued Alan for was so fascinating to me. So many good things here.
Yeah, well, exactly like kind of like the bait and switch as well of like Corey, like us setting up this episode as Corey having a problem with Alan, and then when Alan tries to solve the problem with Corey, he ends up creating a problem with Eric. And I thought that that was something again we just didn't give credit for when we were actually talking about it, and it's really good to see. And as you say, we're older now; we're kind of like looking at it from everyone's everyone's perspective, and everyone has a point of view. And Alan, I love that they pointed out they're not saying that Alan is a bad father, but he's just outnumbered, you know?
You know what? I know we don't really do like a homework section for these episodes, but I saw The Wild Robot. Did you
Oh,
get a
you
chance to see
did.
it?
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, you're gonna cry.
Oh,
100%. But it's a movie that's kind of dedicated to parents and the mistakes that parents make as they're trying their best. Because the whole thing's about a robot that finds like an egg and decides to take care of it, but like it keeps messing up because it doesn't have the programming to do it.
oh
So it
my
has,
God.
and like it's the most adorable movie you'll ever see. Like Disney fucking wishes they made a movie this fucking good. But the whole thing about it was like after watching that and then hearing them talk about this episode, I was like, yeah, I think it's really easy to critique parenting in television shows or in real life when you're kind of from a kid's perspective or you don't have children of your own. So I feel like that's probably like a perspective that was missing from our original critique of this episode that now that I'm really talking and I have more, my friends have more kids, like it's just like I'm more aware of the struggles of parenthood that I can sympathize more with Alan than the kids
Well,
watching it.
yeah, like a very great way of putting that. But to that point, I will say that the storyline itself is good in the idea of like the metaphor that they get when we have the two coconuts.
Yes, yeah.
And he's just one dad has one coconut. He splits it in half, trying to give it to each one of his kids, but for each one, that's not enough. Fantastic thing to teach children from the beginning, and like we kind of move on from it even in the story because it is like a great little metaphor for
Mhm.
what had happened, and like Eric using that metaphor to kind of summarize the episode, but they do just kind of push past it. And
Well, oh, I was just gonna say that, like, I loved what Danielle said. Maybe it was at a different point in the episode where she's like, I had to learn to make a conscious effort with both of my boys that if one wants to play after the other one, that I have to give that person at least a few minutes because I know how they can internalize these things. Like almost commenting on the coconut in that
yeah,
moment in real time. Yeah.
yeah, she was talking. That was like during that Amy and Alan conversation, which
Yeah.
again, they shouted out Amy and like the amazing job that Betsy does, which
Yes.
we're always going to rep for. And again, like Betsy's approach is fantastic in this episode. But really quickly, what I wanted
Yeah.
to really talk about was I read something similar, like a similar parable the other day, which was like a parent with an orange and both of their kids are crying. And so the parent splits the orange in half and gives each in half. And one kid takes the rind off of it, uses it in a pie, and then throws the rest of the way. And the other kid makes like half of a glass of orange juice. And it's like, oh, had the parent just asked each child what they wanted the orange for, that also could have solved everyone's problem. And I was like, oh, that's like I immediately thought of the coconut. And I was like, that's the
Sure.
coconut story, but better. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
not just, hey, like um having to split the orange or the coconut is hard, but talk to your children, see what they actually want instead of
Sure.
like what
Because
they're really
you know
asking
why
for.
that's such a good point? Because the episode ends with this understanding that, wow, as parents, sometimes you can just never get it right. Whereas your story is like, no, with communication, you can actually make better choices and better decisions that help you and your family. So I love that your example kind of gives a path out, whereas this one's just like, yeah, see, we're gonna get it wrong sometimes as parents, and there's nothing really you could do to avoid it.
Well, I mean, but you are like
Yeah,
while I love my story and I just I thought it was like a advancement or like a
sure,
good
sure.
continuation to this story. I will say you're like we don't usually do homework. I don't usually do homework either, but I've been watching Hacks, and
Season
in
three is so
Hacks
good.
there's a scene where um Jean Smart's character is talking to her daughter, and her daughter's like, "Wow, you looked like having a kid must have been really hard for you. I hope I don't fuck it up." And she goes, "You will," but like
Yeah,
it's worth it. And that's kind of like the thing that I feel is missing is understanding that parents, no matter how hard you try, you're going to fuck it up because there's kind of like no right way to do it
Yeah.
where you don't fuck up a kid. Because even if you do it perfectly, you're not giving them a real world example of how the rest of the world works,
Well,
you know?
also, I mean, a lot of times, and if we want to get into this, when parents try to do it perfectly, what they really do is try to overcompensate for the things that were lacking in their childhood, thus creating a whole new issue for this new child. Like,
Yep.
there
There's no
has to,
winning.
there's no way. Well, balance, therapy, communication. Like, obviously, these were answers that we had when this episode was filmed. So I do think that this episode is a great snapshot of probably parenting at that time. But I think that your example probably is a better example of parenting in 2024.
Absolutely. Okay, so kind of really quickly, some other things I wanted to point out that they had talked about. One, we talk about this episode. One of the most memorable scenes of this episode outside of the museum is like the jumping out of the plane.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to acknowledge like they were like, there are no engines. Like all of this is just them acting and like yelling, and it really made it funny. And I just wanted to give them credit for that. Yeah.
Bruh. When
Yeah.
they told me that Rusty is a hang glider,
Yes.
have you ever gone hang gliding, seen
Nope.
hang
And won't.
gliding?
And
Oh,
won't.
well, here's a fun little story. I had an ex-girlfriend, and on her birthday one year, I decided to fucking Groupon hang gliding because I was like, oh, that seems cool.
Nope.
Didn't tell her to the day of. So she didn't have a
Terrible
whole lot of
idea.
time to like research or like do anything. She was just like, yeah, I'm down, whatever.
You pulled the Corey take Topanga up in an airplane move.
I honestly didn't even think about it at the time. This is how influenced I've been by Corey, guys. I'm working through it in therapy. Yeah, she had a great time, memorable experience, but it wasn't until afterwards that I started doing research on how fucking dangerous hang gliding is. And like, it's extremely dangerous. And the fact that Rusty was so casually just like jumping out of Wilfredel's car on like it's actually really wild and dangerous. And I love that they were like, we couldn't even go roller skating, but this motherfucker's jumping off cliffs.
Exactly. I wanted to bring up the fact that I was like, they have made us realize Rusty was so cool. Like Rusty is
such a
absolutely
badass.
like a badass.
Hey, here's a little segue, and I'll go really quick with this. I may have mentioned this before, but when we were in Philadelphia for the 30th anniversary of Boy Meets World, we were wearing our Bro Meets World shirts, randomly walking around Philadelphia. A guy pulled us aside to talk to us about Boy Meets World, and he said, "I don't know anything about that show. I didn't watch it. All I know is that they had William Russ, and William Russ did the greatest performance I ever seen in a Miami Vice episode, and proceeded to tell me in Siege, frame by frame, this Miami Vice episode that William Russ was in and how much he loved it and how much his performance stuck with him. And it's so interesting to think of William Russ as anything other than Alan Matthews, but this motherfucker is an tour. And every time they talk about him, I'm reminded of that. And I'm reminded of that guy who was just like, I saw this one episode that stuck with me forever.
You're not wrong. He literally spoke to us for 30 minutes and we were just walking casually on the street. And so we just stood there and listened. But he was impassionate about Rusty's performance.
Can you imagine someone pulling you aside and talking to you for 30 minutes about a t-shirt you're wearing?
No, not even about the t-shirt that we were wearing. Something that reminded him of the t-shirt that we were wearing. It was a whole thing.
Philly. We love Philly, guys.
Absolutely.
We love Philly.
But it was great to hear their conversation when they were talking about Rusty. It's great to see Rusty's performance in this one. He actually does a really good job. Go ahead.
I was just going to say to that point, I love that Wilfredel was like, oh, this is one of my favorite Feeney moments of the entire show. His comedic performance of him being anxious about no one coming to him for advice. And they were comparing that to the Feeney and Amy moment that happened when she went back, like where Amy's trying to talk to Feeney, and Amy's just kind of talking over Feeney, and they were like, that didn't really work. What worked really well and what was memorable was this idea that Feeney has become so much of a caretaker to the Matthews that he can't sleep at night if an event happens that he wasn't included in. And they brought such a unique perspective to that in a way that really made me feel like, wow, for Feeney, the Matthews kind of almost represent the family he never had. And that he gets to be like a surrogate, a part of, which kind of makes me like, my heartbreak for Feeney and like make me love him even more, that like the Matthews kind of fulfilled that for him in a way. I just never made that comparison before listening to them talk about it.
It's interesting to me because I think that like that's kind of like embedded in the show
Mhm.
almost. Like he is a surrogate grandfather in the
Mhm.
dynamic, and I do feel like I wish the show leaned into that a little bit more because we do get taste of
Yeah.
like Feeny just having breakfast with Alan and Amy, and something where it's like, oh, you are our neighbor, but you're actually part of our lives, and you've helped raise
I
our
wanted
kids.
that so much during the college years for Feeney to become Feeney the grandpa, where for no
Yes.
reason at all, we cut to Corey just like helping Feeney out in the garden, just talking to him about the problems he's having in school. And they're just like having breakfast. Like it's a relationship that exists because they're friends and neighbors, not because they were student and teacher.
Well, see, and I would have loved it if we could have just gotten more of like, and we were talking about comedy earlier. For me, it's like I've seen it done now, and maybe we weren't doing it in the '90s, but like you could absolutely tell stories where the kids are in college and having their own adventures, but Alan and Amy and Feeney are having like their own little lessons and things that tie
Sure.
in. I feel like there's a way to do it, especially like with shows like Modern Family, where we've
Yeah.
seen intergenerational storytelling that feels relevant and still sticks to the premise of Boy Meets World.
I know that this is just a tangent, so we'll ignore it, but I have to say, rewatching Modern Family, I'm honestly so surprised at how well they do intergenerational storytelling because going back and watching shows from the 90s, like for example, my girlfriend's been sick for like 10 days and she's been marathoning Reba. Like Reba's such a great show, but like I've been rewatching a lot of like old shows and it just feels like wow, intergenerational storytelling is actually kind of tricky to do. It's very hard to capture three different audiences at once. And so whenever I see it well like done well, I always applaud it and I think that between Feeney and Alan and Corey, you get that in Boy Meets World.
And again, I'm so sorry, but like this is what I felt Hacks was doing, which is why I actually like
Yeah,
gotten into it. It's like oh, it's intergenerational in the workplace. It's just
yeah,
like what is it like to be the older person, like who is kind of out of touch but also has the experience, the millennial who has feels like they've been given a rough card professionally and that they're smarter than they actually are, but also they're actually really talented
yeah.
when given an opportunity. And then Gen Z coming up and they're just like oblivious to all of it and just excited to
Sure.
be here, but also like they know their boundaries and like I'm not gonna do anything more than what I signed up for. So I think that this is a great time. I think intergenerational storytelling is phenomenal. And I do think we moved away from it for a
Yeah.
while. And I'm glad that they're starting to see the value in it.
Yeah, because I feel like part of the reason why this episode works so well is because like they said I think Danielle said at the top of the episode like I'm so glad we're getting something other than a love story. I'm so glad we're
Yeah.
seeing what's going on with the parents. Like I love the kids, but I'm sick of that storyline and I want something else. And I think that intergenerational storyline helps you to appreciate the show at different stages of your life. Like the fact that they're able to appreciate Alan when they're in their 40s, like you know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
makes you like love a show longer, I think, than like not to say anything bad about it, but like a Freaks and Geeks, for example, where like my high school self could really identify it
Yeah.
with it. And when I watch it now, I'm almost like I view it as nostalgia, a reflection of my old self, but not something I can necessarily take with me now.
Absolutely. And speaking of getting more, this reminded me of like the B plot. We were very dismissive of the B plot. And again, I think like if you
Yeah,
watch it again, it's probably not, it doesn't, the thing is, it doesn't like live up to the same like perfection of writing that the
sure.
A storyline is. However, you can't deny like they were like, this is some of Matt's best comedic moments.
It really
Um,
is. And I feel like because they finally had Sean at the extreme level that Will Friedle comes sometimes goes to with like the tape that he has to listen to at night in order to sleep. Like, of course he would freak out. Like he plays the perfect straight man when you give him someone to play a straight man off of. And when he's put in a position where he doesn't have a wacky counterpart, he kind of fades into the background. So I feel like this is a great dynamic. I love that they brought up little Corey and we had the whole like pigs,
yeah.
storyline that comes up. And And I also love that they commented on how weird it is that the audience woos when
Yes.
seeing them sleeping together. They're
Yes.
like, this is incestuous. This is weird. If I were the director, I would have cut this out. They had a whole conversation about how they had to have audibly capture the woos separately and then edit them in order for it to be included. So it was just an interesting conversation to hear that.
Like you said, I was really glad they brought it up because it's still the one thing you're like, why are we doing this?
What?
And for them to be like, why did we do this? I think it's fantastic because it's just a moment that doesn't need to be there. But I also would have liked it just talking to like the performances in the storyline as well was pointed out. I think there was like another situation of like showing the fun side of the trailer park, not
Sure.
necessarily just punching down, so to speak, which is
And
what we do.
yeah. And I think we focused on that a lot when we were watching it. And I was like, this feels so class. And I think that, like, honestly, and not to say anything against the writers, because we've met them all and they're wonderful people. And they all, like, a lot of them come from like blue collar backgrounds. But I'm like, specifically, like, it feels like no one who grew up in the trailer park actually worked on the show
Yeah.
because it's all the like, I don't know, the like cartoonish characteristics of thinking about the trailer park. It's like the who's the fucking guy who had all those movies when we were a kid? Ernest. It's
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
Ernest cartoonish southern hickness that like comes out where like everybody in the trailer park has this weird southern accent in Philadelphia and just like there's so many things that feel like oh you're on the outside looking in trying to find a story versus being the person who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks retelling their story. So I just feel like this is a great example of seeing that when you have Sean at these extremes where it's like the trailer park can't be all bad, which is why I was trying to like advocate for like Chet and like Sean's storyline in the Christmas episode somehow
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it needs to have some humanity to it because otherwise Sean's whole childhood is a joke, but it's like, no, this is trauma that deeply affected him. So we should take it seriously and show that there's ups and downs.
Yeah, and then also like this idea of who Jack is at this point in time versus who
Sure.
Jack becomes. And I remember it's so funny because I was like, I go and I'm like, I don't understand like the Jack hate in season 7. But
Yeah.
in this season, I'm like, oh, when they were introducing him, he is kind of classist. He is kind of dismissive. And instead of using these opportunities to like teach him lessons, as you were saying that we could have done in the last episode, to kind of like be more open to a different way of living, they just kind of always bring it back to and they were brothers or like this has all just been about brothers wanting to be close. And it's like or you could explore how not being in each other's lives meant that they had limited understanding of the world around them, and by being in each other's lives they are being confronted with how wealth plays into a person's personality.
100%, because at no point do we have Jack re-examining his own inherent bias. And someone who grew up rich in New York City would have an inherent bias to being in the trailer park with the dude from the outskirts of Philadelphia. And they never play into that. He's always empathetic. He's always like trying to be a good older brother to Sean. And he never seems to have any issues with it in a way that I'm like, wow, I think we would have cared about this character more if we saw him grow into that person versus him being there from the jump.
Absolutely. And again, I've said this before. I honestly feel and we didn't talk about it, but in the last episode when he has the line, I don't know her that well, when talking about Topanga. I was like, it's just to me, this would have been great for them to just constantly rehash that Jack is new. He doesn't know these people. Maybe he has like an opinion about all of them that doesn't fit with everyone else's identity of who they are, because I just think that outside perspective would have been helpful for him to be like, I don't know, like why can't Topanga just have the Christmas tree she wants? My family does this, or I'm advocating for like the Jack secretly hates Corey's storyline and like the fact that he was going to sleep on the couch but he can't because Corey's there now. Like I just think there's something there.
I think that even after listening to this episode and hearing all of the praise that they gave for Matt Lawrence's performance and everything, I still feel like this B storyline is so weak compared to the A storyline because the A storyline exceeds expectations and succeeds in so many ways that like the average Boy Meets World episode tries to do as well as what this episode does with the A storyline, that I still feel like the B storyline kind of falls a little flat, specifically because the storyline is so similar to the Topanga Christmas storyline, in which, you know, we're just examining the differences of the class. So I think they could have done something different. I think they could have done something deeper. And you know, I don't even know if there's a resolution to the storyline between Jack and Sean, right?
They wrestle.
They wrestle. Because that's what brothers do. All right.
Exactly. So, you know, that is what it is. The last thing I wanted to say is like midway through this episode, they do kind of pause and writer, you know, announces that Danielle's announcement of having been diagnosed with breast cancer and like sharing that vulnerability really helped, and it got other people to you know, do their own checkups. So I just thought that was not only great in terms of like allowing us to hear where she's at in her journey of recovery, but also to see the impact that it has and why sharing these kind of vulnerabilities are important.
100%. And you know, the thing that I think is most important, because we've done the whole 7 seasons. We've talked about how, you know, we had this expectation of Topanga from our childhoods that didn't quite match up to what was given to us. It doesn't matter, because the legend of Topanga, the idea of Topanga kind of like has manifested differently in the minds of millennials. And so for her to like be that girl still, for us and our, you know, aging bodies, and as we're dealing with scary things, and to have her as a female role model still, I think just means a lot. You know, there's so many people in Hollywood who are just genuinely disappointing us left and right.
Yeah.
So I just want to continually give flowers to people who are using their audience to make a difference for the positive. So absolutely 100% give Danielle Fishel all the love in the world, because, you know, it's like I said with Trina, like to go through these things publicly, to have the person at the grocery store who you've never seen before randomly ask you about something personal, like it fucking sucks.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, there's a strength that they have to have beyond what we're even seeing, you know, displayed publicly. So I just always have to give love to that.
Absolutely. So that is our coverage of these 2 episodes. We will be back.
Can I say one more thing? I just want to say, the last thing I want to say is that Danielle coined the term FFF, Feeney's Fits Are Fire, and I just want to keep that going.
Okay, I love it. I love that they also taught Ryder what fits were.
Yes. He knows the Bechdel test, but he doesn't know fits. We're working on them, guys.
That is actually very much in character, all around. Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for our Boy Meets World Reacts. Hit us up at Boy Meets World on all the places. You are on our Patreon, so you know how to contact us. You know how to reach out. Look forward to seeing you guys again for 513 and 514.
Oh, we're gonna get into it, guys.
Yeah. I love that segue. I love it. We'll see you guys on the other side. Later, bruh.
Later, bruh.
When this boy meets world.